Okay.
I'll show you this transaction, which is dated on the 3rd of June, 2014. It's the sum of $250,000. And there was a memo written by yourself, addressed to this governor of the, well, a memo written and addressed to the governor of the central bank. I'd like you to confirm whether this was written by you. For Mr. Sanajaju, Chief of Protocol, to receive the sum of $250,000.
Yes, this was signed by me.
Was signed by you.
Yes.
Now, there are several things. We have come across several memos that you wrote to the governor that were not on letterhead, and for authorizing the withdrawal of funds. Firstly, this $250,000, what was it for?
It was given to the president, former president.
It was given to the former president.
As directed.
Do you know what was it for?
I don't know.
So, who asked you to withdraw the funds?
The former president.
Was it minuted to you?
Not necessarily, but like I explained the last time, a lot of these transactions, after some time, we send him a minute detailing the transactions that he gave us instructions, and we executed it, and he would sign off on it.
Did you send any such email?
Sorry?
Did you send any such minute on this one?
On this particular one, I don't remember.
Mr. Sabally, did you ever think that you may have to account for these funds since you were signatory to this account?
Absolutely, yes.
What steps or precaution did you take?
The precautions I take include those minutes I was talking about, and I was glad that I saw Nuha Toure come here and actually give several examples of those minutes that we did send back to the former president for him to sign off that he actually gave these instructions, and we executed. And in terms of accountability, I was not just waiting for a day after Jame. I was prepared for a day that within his own government, he would accuse me of actually doing those things without his authority. And that's why we took those moves, which were very risky, but we were able to get away with it by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Refer to Mr. Toure. You see, Mr. Toure did make a lot of copies of documents.
Yes.
And that seems to me to be consistent with a person who was taking precautions. Now, what you've been telling us is that you did, in some occasions, without being specific, take the precaution of writing back, minuting back to His Excellencies, just to confirm that the transaction had been done so that you can have a record. But you have not been helpful to us in showing us any of these minutes. And certainly for transactions in the range of the amounts we are talking about, which are in regard to public funds, one does expect that a person would make some sort of record, even a notation, so that you might be able to explain what the money might be for or the circumstances. Do you understand where I'm coming from, I'm sure? I'll show you, yes.
May I react to that statement?
Yes, you can.
Those documents that Nuha Toure presented here, you would see that all of them were endorsed by me and sent to the former president by me. There is no way he could have sent it to the former president without my endorsement. And on occasion, it took me weeks before I was able to summon the courage to actually send those minutes to the president, because I know the implications. I never took a single piece of paper out of State House into my house for reasons of my safety and my life. And when I was kicked out and detained at the NIA, one night they picked me up at 11 p.m. in handcuffs, went to my residence to see if I had any government documentations there. I was glad and happy that I didn't keep any of them in my house. What I did was to do what I could do at great risk, and the records were kept at the presidency under my direction and supervision, and it was those records that my very able deputy then, Nuha Toure, was able to take out at some point and bring here. I was fully involved, and I actually directed all of those moves.
Well, thank you for that explanation. The only challenge we have is that Nuha, your very able deputy, unfortunately was not involved in every transaction that you were involved in. So he may have had explanations for the transactions for which he was involved, but not all of them. So one transaction I'm going to show you, this is not really a transaction, but it's a statement by the prepared at the central bank by the governor, listing a number of transactions totaling $36 million, which according to this memo were monies that were withdrawn by the office of the president over a period, and that they were then passing some sort of journal to regularize it. I'm going to show it to you. Just kindly look at it and see whether there is anything helpful you can tell the Commission. You can show him this. Show him that. Now you will see that he starts by saying during the months of March and April 2014. This is a period which you have confirmed you were the Secretary General since you left in June 2014. Is that correct?
Yes.
He says the Central Bank of the Gambia made various payments on the request of the Office of the President. Documentation in the form of letter of instruction with the appropriate signatories is pending. In this regard, authority is hereby granted to pass necessary entries to debit the International Gateway account with amounts indicated below. And he lists out 5 transactions on various days from the 13th March to 24th April, totaling 36 million, as I have said. Is there anything you can tell us that would be useful with regard to these amounts?
The first entry is clearly...
And, sorry, before you answer, could you look at the attachments? Because some of the attachments were actually seen to be signed by yourself. Okay?
I've gone through them.
You've done?
Yes.
Yeah, can you explain any of them?
But these are some of the transactions that the President would request as a matter of urgency. And because at the material time, the second signatory to the account is not in, I would do a note to the Governor to release these funds with the understanding that once the signatories are all in the office, we would do the proper debit request. So we've done these things before, but normally after some time, the former Governor Ahmad would call me and remind me that we need to regularize these things, and we would regularize them. You would see that by the date of this transaction, this was April, very close to the time I left, and that means we didn't have sufficient time for me and the Governor to reconcile again. But it was a regular practice for the former Governor Ahmadu Koli to, after some time, call me and appeal to me to make sure that we regularize these transactions.
Mr. Sabally.
Yes.
There is just one thing that concerns me. You were Secretary General, head of the civil service, and it obviously would be assumed that you were aware of all the necessary government policy documents, including FI, include the financial instructions, that is, and so on. Why was it necessary? Because you were a signatory, not the President, to this account, you and Mr. Nuha Toure at the time. Why couldn't you just comply with procedure by, following the proper process of withdrawing funds from the central bank?
Well, we were working under President Jammeh, who I said here before, very powerful, did several things out of procedure, including tinkering with our very constitution, including entrenched clauses, and everybody's hands were tied. Not because everybody wanted to just tag along, but the situation was such that one had to be extra careful dealing with this 800-pound gorilla that we were all dealing with at some point during the 22 years that he was here. So this was not a normal dispensation. And as far as I know, the authorities we had to sign these documents and to do these things devolved from him as the chief executive. So we were not just acting because we wanted to act, but there were constraints surrounding everybody, even those out of government, like commercial banks doing things that they knew were out of order, but this was President Yahya Jammeh. He was not like any other president. And at some point, within this dispensation, within this jurisdiction, some of us, all we were thinking about is how to save our lives and to pray that we exit the system in one piece. These are the circumstances.
Mr. Sabally, my question really was quite a straightforward one. I understand all those circumstances that you're talking about. I hear what you're saying. My question is simple. This was the central bank.
Yes.
You were the office of the president. You were the signatory to this account, and with Mr. Ture. There was a procedure. I'm sure you are not saying President Jammeh told you not to follow the procedure, to withdraw the money. All I'm asking, why was it necessary for you and the governor to be calling each other to withdraw money from the central bank without just following the right procedure and signing and sending it and collecting the money? That's what I want to understand.
The problem is the way you are saying it is not the way it happened, like me and the governor
That's
calling each other.
That's why I want to understand, because what the governor says here is that during the months of March and April, the Central Bank of the Gambia made various payments on the request of the Office of the President. And you have told us that the governor had called you on occasion asking you to regularize certain withdrawals. I'm asking, why was that necessary when there was a procedure for withdrawing money?
I think I gave you the perspective, the circumstances under which we were operating. And this is important to remind this commission and the public that is watching that we just did not act out of recklessness. We were patriotic, diligent professionals working in a system that was very difficult to operate within.
Mr. Sabally, you don't have to answer the way, of course you can answer the way you want, but I just want to bring you back to this particular exhibit, CB18. Here are 5 transactions which all indicate that money was withdrawn without any documentation at all. And subsequently, the governor then tried to regularize the procedure. So I'm just asking you why it was necessary to do it that way. Is there any explanation you have specifically regarding this?
You know, I'm sorry if I don't seem to be answering, but the way you frame your question sometimes, if I give you a direct answer, like you said, without documentation, there is documentation. The documentation is not adequate. I recognize and accept that. These transactions were done as matters of urgency directed by the president, under whose authority we were operating. Now, I sent governor a note rather than no documentation, and we had a system where after a couple of transactions, he will come back to me when the signatories are in place to make sure the proper documentation is put in place. They were directives given by the president as a matter of urgency, and my operation, my function, was derived from him as president, and I did what he wanted to do under the circumstances with the understanding and the willingness that we would regularize the situation like we did before. Unfortunately, these ones came too close to the time that I left office.
Just one last question on this. Why the memos without letterhead?
Sorry?
Why the memoranda without letterhead? Why not on your letterhead? Why?
I believe I explained that.
No, I didn't hear your explanation. I would like you to explain again.
It's not, these accounts would have more than one signatory.
I understand that.
Once one signatory is not available, I cannot send a regular letter. That's why I sent a memo to commit myself that I'm withdrawing these forms, and as soon as the signatories are back, we'll do the proper documentation. There were temporary measures employed with the understanding that we would regularize the situation.
I'm sure you will appreciate that the central bank policies did not permit of these memoranda, and their own answer is it was from the office of the president, and therefore we did it, even though we know it is wrong. Now you are from the office of the president, and what you're telling us is that even though it's wrong, it was urgent, and therefore you did it.
But the intention, I explained, was not to flout the law, was to get done what the president wanted doing, with the intention and understanding with the central bank that these processes will be regularized, and we did regularize other transactions that happened before. We were not acting willingly with pre-intention to flout the law. That was not our intention.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I see that it's time, and we'll require Mr. Sabally to come back tomorrow.
Very well, we'll rise. It's 15:15.
Thank you.
And we'll be back tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Thank you.